is intended. And if something is said well, then it's shared well, and the transformation moves in the direction of the Dharma. I, I want to visit some basic teachings in our lineage uh, so that they don't pass by quickly. So, on the one hand, if everybody says, I already knew that, that was the point. Uh, if, on the other hand, people say, I already knew that, but not that way, then it's also the point because recognition of the Dharma is the point. So we just chanted the Heart Sutra together, and toward the end, there's a phrase, it's true, not false. Uh, if you don't find that a little silly, if everybody, Eileen gets things very quickly, so she she knows why this is funny, and now you do too. Uh, of course, if it's true, it's not false. So why bother saying that? And not is it true or is it false, but why is it true? Why is it false? How is it true? How is it false? When is it true? When is it false? And what is it that's true? And what is it that's false? Uh, that may also be a sufficient Dharma talk, that to rest with the teaching true, not false, may be way more valuable than anything else I can say. The temple rules say when you listen to the words of the Zen master, keep your mind wide and open and do not be attached to the words and think I have no use for this speech. I encourage you to think I have no use for the speech uh, because the point of the speech is for you to see something and say, oh, I knew that. But seeing something and saying, oh, I knew that, only has some value if it helps you live according to what you just said, I already knew. Otherwise, you don't really know. So, one element of true, not false, is it is the language of the Dharma. And one element of false, not true, is it's the language of delusion. And perhaps what differentiates the language of delusion from the language of the Dharma are what the ears that hear it are doing when they hear it, and what those ears do when it's been heard and after it's been heard. Because all teaching only has the intention of returning things to the source. And the source is the person sitting there actively listening right now because there is no other source. Where else would it be? It doesn't do me very much good personally if Robert gets it because he can't get it for me. Maybe he can help me get it for me if he gets it. So all Zen teachings point in that direction. And we do well to receive them in that direction because uh, Buddha was a master of buckshot. And Buddha was also a master of one single arrow hitting the target. Sometimes you need buckshot, and sometimes by virtue of buckshot, the arrow hits the target. And there's a word that you may have encountered if you've encountered some of the traditional teachings, a turning phrase. In fact, you'll hear a request often in these old stories, teacher, give me one turning phrase. And then they do, and then the student doesn't get it, and then the teacher says, don't be a fool. And then either they go off and contemplate that for 20 years, or all of a sudden they wake up. Those are very attractive stories. But turning phrase is only that which turns your mind back to your own nature. Because false means looking at something else, and true means looking at the Dharma. Looking at the Dharma has an element of stillness and quiet, but it's not precisely that, although it can feel that way. But if we go to seek stillness and quiet, we miss the essential point. If, however, you want to experience stillness and quiet, please consider this. Every second, the heart beats 4 times, which means every quarter of a second, 3 parts of your heart are resting for 3/4 of a second. So every minute, 60 times 4, you have 240 moments of rest. And you breathe in and out, so they say, 12 times a minute. And experientially, although not mechanically or electrically, your diaphragm stops twice every time you breathe. So every minute, you have 24 moments of stillness and quiet. So that's just an encouragement that you don't have to seek that outside, because that's not where it resides. Because if you notice that the heart beats and you notice that the breath breathes, you'll see that the lungs return to the lungs and the heart returns to the heart, and that because of that, phenomenon can happen. And because phenomenon do happen, they transform. And because they transform, it's false to hold on to any particular phenomenon as a source of steadiness, because quickly it's gone. And you yourself can see how that might apply to anything about your own life, which is the point. Not what I say it has to do with your life, but how you see, oh, yes, that's so, but this is how I say it. And this is how I live it, because then when you speak it, it's your voice and it's not something you've borrowed. Borrowed Dharma is better than no Dharma. But borrowed Dharma is only so you can own your own Dharma. And then you can lend it to somebody else so they can borrow it so they can have it. And lending it to somebody else so they can borrow it so they can have it rests very solidly on recognizing how wounds occur and how they heal. Because something about taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha has something to do with seeing how suffering arises and how to engage it wisely, which has something to do with everything I just said. Because knowing how this is recognizing it's that way here because it's that way every place else. And it's that way every place else because it's that way here. And part of being that way here and that way every place else means each mind moment and each point only has its own quality, because what other quality would it have? And yet somehow we're busy trying to transform things into qualities that are pleasing for us. If you think about that, that's funny. If you don't think about that, it's painful. Oh, if you'd rather be in pain, don't think about it. And if you'd rather laugh, take a look. Because if you see that, then you become the refuge. You become your own refuge, and you become the refuge for those around you. And becoming the refuge for yourself and becoming the refuge for those around you is a bodhisattva, which just means awake being. And awake being indicates this is a sentient being who knows something about being among other sentient beings. Because A, we don't have a choice. So B, we might as well take a look at what that involves. And taking a look at what that involves then allows us to recognize what we're connected to and how. And recognizing what we're connected to and how opens up into time and space and cause and effect. And that sounds like, oh my God, how wonderful, how metaphysical, because it's normal. And the only thing that's remarkable about it is we didn't see before that it was normal. So what happens often during practice is we get these touchstones of normalcy when we're sitting, or touchstones of normalcy as we're going through the course of our daily life. And because that's so engaging, we want more of it. And because we want more of it, we move in the direction of trying to make other moments look like that moment that was so engaging that's already passed. And because we're trying to recreate moments that pass, we miss the moment before us. And we long for something that we think we don't have, but we only don't have it because we're looking at what's false, not true. And if we look at what's true, not false, it's very clear it's already in our hands. We may not be attracted to that quality in that moment, and yet recognizing that that quality in that moment can be no other way in that moment allows the next moment to be itself too. And when we learn through experience that that's the way that things flow, we discover our value in this world more richly than we already know it. We already know something about it, right? Everybody in this room has been of service to somebody else at some point, even if only once. Because when you were born, the chances are very high you made a noise and your parent picked you up, so you were of service to them in teaching them how to be a caretaker. So even if it was only that once, you'll be of service when you die for the same reason in reverse. So consider if you live in the realm of being born and dying immediately, you multiply that service infinitely because there's infinite time to do that. And then maybe you have some appreciation for your inherent talents, right? You all had the talent to figure out how to come into this Zoom room. And although somebody taught you, you took that in sufficiently to make this connection happen. And because this connection happened, now we're in the middle of this kind of conversation. And we're in the middle of this kind of conversation because we have agreed among ourselves that there's something of fundamental value in doing this here so we can recognize something of fundamental value when we leave the Zoom room and do whatever we're doing next. So here's an encouragement because if we focus primarily on doing the thing that creates a space that heals the wound, that's good. It's better than not taking time to heal the wound. Otherwise, the wound just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, as it's healing, it feels good. And even if it doesn't feel good when it's healing because we feel it more profoundly, when we stand up, some of the healing has happened and that feels good. So that's better than not doing it at all because walking around less wounded is better than walking around more wounded. If we want to continue that posture of mind, then if we look at what we're doing as training, we're not training ourselves to generate a feeling. We're not training ourselves to generate an insight. We're not training ourselves to generate some particular state that's more valuable than some other particular state because all of these are phenomenon that are contingent on circumstances, and so they transform. And although doing everything I just said has a value, its value is limited by the way we approach what happens when things change. This is my chance to quote a venerable person so I sound more important. Uh, Huineng, the sixth ancestor, when talking about samadhi and prajna, doesn't voice it the way that most of us encounter it, as something that's still deep, unmoving, and uh, invariably always wise. And we're not, so we have to work harder. So what he says is that uh, samadhi is, in all circumstances, favorable or unfavorable, the mind rests in its fundamental nature. And when I read that, I thought, oh, I can do that. I can't maintain a state of mind, but oh, okay, that's accessible to regular people. And prajna, which we translate as wisdom, which has the root of prajna, meaning not knowing, maybe sounds familiar to those who are in our tradition, means in all circumstances, favorable or unfavorable, perceive nature with wisdom. And again, I thought, oh, I can do that. I don't have to be wise all the time. My teaching is always before me, so maybe just be a good student. And of course, when we're sitting, we encounter favorable and unfavorable circumstances. So one element of the formal practice in the sanctuary that we're now sitting in together is just to learn in all circumstances, favorable or unfavorable, rest in your fundamental nature and perceive it wisely. You can do that. And you can do that when you stand up too, but not by doing the same physical thing as you do when you're sitting, because you're not doing that anymore. You're doing some other thing. What you're doing, what we're all doing, is engaging in the routines that carry us through life, because if we didn't have routines, we'd have to figure out everything each time we saw it. Right? What's this thing at the end of my leg and what do I do with it? Kind of thing. Because if you look at infants before they can walk, that's like, what do I do with this thing? And they're figuring it out. It's like, oh, it moves. Look, mommy, it moves. Look what I can do, you know? And then they figure it out and then they stop thinking about it's the thing that moves and then it becomes functional. If they always had to figure it out, they'd never pick up their rattle. Hmm? Because we don't have to think about it once we've mastered the routine, then we have the opportunity to get distracted because we can put one foot in front of the other while we're thinking about a myriad of things. And then, of course, what we're doing is we're training ourselves to be distracted, and then we become masters of distraction. And then we wonder when we want to be focused why we can't. Well, we've trained ourselves not to be. And so the things that focus us are the things that are so intrinsically engaging that we cannot but focus. So maybe it's good to do something intentional with the same intention that we carry forward when we're sitting, which is this. So I encourage you, try this for a week. Take a handful of things you do anyway all day long, so you're not making a time when you're doing something different. But do that thing differently with the same attention that you approach this practice here, with the same intention that you're listening. Just a handful, because otherwise it feels like too much. So things like washing your face, grooming, dressing, folding laundry, washing dishes, going up and down stairs. Better if you do it several times a day and just make those 47 seconds or 2 minutes. You say, oh, this is my combing my hair training. And then you'll see after a week, oh, something happens. I don't know what, because you haven't done that way yet, because I just said it. And so you just thought, oh, maybe that's good. All I can say is if you do it, then after a week, you'll know what it does. And if you don't do it, you won't. Your choice. Because when you listen to the words of the Zen master, keep a mind which is large and open. Do not think, I have no use for this speech. Thank you.